The ringing of the bell above the door made me pull away from wiping the counter. I looked up and felt my stomach clench into a tight knot. Standing in the doorway was Vanity, my daughter, whom I hadn't seen in almost 2 months. She was dressed inappropriately flashy for our little diner, Laura's, with tight jeans, a leather jacket, and sunglasses that she hadn't removed since she'd entered the room. I knew right away she wanted something. She never just showed up like that. "Hi, Mom." She faked a smile, taking off her sunglasses and heading toward the counter. "You look tired. Still working in that shithole?" I forced a smile out of myself, though I felt a tightness inside. 40 years old and acting like a spoiled teenager. "It's called being busy, honey, and I love my job," I replied, continuing to wipe down the counter. "Cup of coffee?" "Sure." She sat down in a high chair and put her bag in front of her. "And can I get a pecan pie to go with it? You know, like when I was a kid." I nodded and turned away from the coffee machine, trying to calm my racing heart. When Vanity brought up her childhood, it almost always meant the next step would be asking for money. "How are the children?" I asked, setting the cup in front of her. I hadn't seen Dakota and Corey in a while. "They're fine. They miss their grandmother." She paused, sipping her coffee. "Dakota's getting ready for prom. She needs a dress. You know how important that is to a girl." I set a plate with a piece of pie in front of her and sat down on the chair across from her. There were hardly any customers, just an elderly couple in the far corner finishing their late breakfast. "I could buy her a dress," I offered. "Or we could go together to pick one out." Vanity wrinkled her nose as if I'd suggested something indecent. "Come on, Mom. She's 17. She doesn't want Grandma picking out her dress. I thought you were just gonna, help out financially." I sighed. "Here we go." "How much?" "Well, times are tough right now." She started stirring the sugar in her coffee, avoiding my gaze. "I've been thinking about business. I have a great idea for an online store. Just need some startup capital. I've calculated it all out." I waited without interrupting. Laura, the owner of the diner, looked out of the kitchen and, seeing my daughter, nodded understandingly and disappeared. She'd known Vanity since she was a teenager, and she'd always said there was something wrong with that kid. 100,000, Vanity blurted out and quickly added when she saw the look on my face. "I'll pay it back with interest, Mom. It's an investment." My hands involuntarily clenched into fists under the counter. 100,000. Practically all the money from the sale of the land. Money that was supposed to provide me with a secure old age after decades of working for a pittance. "Vanity, I can't give you that much," I said as calmly as I could. "I don't have that kind of money." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between disappointment and anger. "Come on, Mom. The whole town is talking about how you sold Old Man Clive's lot to those developers from Santa Fe. I know you got a lot more than 100 grand. I felt the blood drain from my face. So she knows. Though I shouldn't have been surprised. In Taos, news spreads faster than a fire in the drought season. "It was your grandfather's land, not old Clive's," I corrected quietly. "And that money is all I have for my old age. I can't just—" "Old age?" Vanity interrupted me with a strange anger. "You're 67 and you're still working in this diner. What's the difference? You'll still be working like you always have." I felt something cold spill inside me. My own daughter thought I should work until I died so she could have my money. "Vanity, I want to help you, but what?" She leaned across the counter toward me. "What could be more important than your own daughter? Or do you think I'm not worthy of this money? That it's a punishment for not becoming a teacher or a nurse like you wanted?" "It's not that," I shook my head. "It's just that it's all I have. I can't take that risk." "It's not a risk," she exclaimed, and the elderly couple in the corner turned in our direction. Vanity lowered her voice. "This is an opportunity. For all of us. I can finally get back on my feet. Dakota can go to college. Corey needs some things for school." At the mention of grandchildren, I felt a familiar sense of guilt. I really hadn't helped them much in recent years, partly because Vanity rarely let me see them, partly because of my own fatigue and frustration. "How's Corey doing?" I asked, trying to change the subject. "Is he doing well in school?" "Don't change the subject," Vanity cut me off. "I'm serious, Mom. I need that money." And don't tell me you can't help your own daughter when you have a fortune in the bank. I looked at her and saw not a 40-year-old woman, but a little girl who screamed and stomped her feet when she didn't get the toy she wanted at the store. Only now the toy was worth $100,000. Tell me about your business plan, I asked, buying time. What are you going to sell? Vanity stammered. And I noticed her lick her lips quickly, a gesture that always gave her away when she lied. It's, handmade, jewelry. You can make a good living at it nowadays, especially in our tourist town. I've already found suppliers and a site for the workshop. I nodded, pretending to believe it, even though we both knew Vanity never made anything with her own hands. She was always looking for the easy way out. Can I think about it? I asked. It's a large sum, and I can't decide at once. Vanity's face contorted. Think? Mom, you know you'll make the right decision. I'm your daughter. Who else are you going to give this money to? Your pet Trenton? He hasn't even called you in months. That was a low blow. My son really wasn't in my life much, but the mention of it by Vanity hurt me. It's not about Trenton, I said. It's just that I need to think things through. I can't just hand over my life savings like this with no guarantees. Guarantees? Vanity laughed bitterly. What kind of guarantees do you need? I'm your daughter. Don't you trust me? The question hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. The truth was, I didn't trust her, not after all the times she'd borrowed money and not paid it back, not after all the promises she'd broken. I just need time, I repeated. Let's talk in a week. A week from now might be too late, she was almost shouting. I need to bail out the premises. If I don't do it in the next few days, someone else will take it. I felt the irritation building up inside. It's always the same, always in a hurry, always in crisis, always having to solve everything immediately. Vanity, please, I tried to speak calmly. Let's discuss this when you're calmer. Maybe I can give you a part of the sum or part of the money? She looked at me in disbelief. You don't understand. I need everything. It's a matter of life and death. Something in her tone made me wary. There was something real behind the drama. Fear. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she tapped her fingernails nervously on the tabletop. What's going on, Vanity? I asked quietly. Are you in trouble? She straightened up suddenly, wiping away her tears and putting the familiar mask of confidence back on her face. You know what? Forget it. I'll find the money somewhere else. Don't worry about your precious pension. She started packing her bag, tossing her sunglasses into it defiantly. Wait, Vanity. Don't leave like that. I held out my hand, but she pulled away. I don't need your pity. She cut me off. I thought I could count on my mother, but I guess I was wrong. All my life I've been left to my own devices. Why should it be any different now? It wasn't fair and we both knew it. I'd raised her on my own after Clive died, worked 2 jobs so she could have what the other children had. But now was not the time to bring that up. If you're in trouble, I'll help, I said. But I need to know the truth. Vanity looked at me for a long moment as if deciding something about herself. Then she shook her head. You know, she said with a bitter chuckle. I thought you'd understand. After all, it's not forever. Think of it as an investment in the future. Your grandchildren will pay you back. That phrase hit me like a slap in the face. What did she mean by that? Was she using her children, my grandchildren, as some kind of collateral? What did you say? I asked, not believing my ears. You heard me. Vanity threw her bag on her shoulder. Dakota and Corey will grow up and take care of you. Isn't that what you want? For them to have a future? So they can take care of their old grandmother when the time comes? I stared at her, trying to figure out if she was really threatening me with my grandchildren's future, or if this was just another manipulation. Vanity. The children don't have to. Of course they don't, she interrupted. No one owes anyone anything. You've made that very clear to me. She headed for the exit, but turned around at the door. I'll call you in a couple days. Think about what I said. It's not just money, Mom, it's our future. Mine, yours, the kids, the whole family. The bell jingled again and she disappeared out the door, leaving me sitting at the counter feeling like I'd been kicked in the butt. I stared at the half-eaten piece of pecan pie she hadn't even touched, and I could feel the anxiety building inside. What did her words about grandchildren mean? What did she mean by a matter of life and death? And why was she so sure I would eventually give her the money? Laura came out of the kitchen and silently placed a cup of tea in front of me. She didn't ask anything, just put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed it lightly before leaving to serve the new customers who had entered after Vanity left. I wrapped my arms around the cup, feeling the warmth seep through the ceramic. My head felt heavy with thoughts. I thought about the money in the account. The $120,000 from the sale of the land my father had bought back in the 50s. Land that I had sold just 6 months ago after much doubt. It wasn't just money. It was my security, my independence, my chance to finally stop worrying about how to pay the bills or what would happen if I got sick. After 45 years on the job, I'd earned that right. But Vanity was my daughter. And if she was really in trouble, I sighed and took a sip of tea. Something told me that this time it was more serious than usual, and that the decision I would make would change not only my life, but also the lives of my grandchildren. I sat like that for another hour before returning to work, automatically serving and smiling at the customers, though a storm of doubts and fears raged inside me. Vanity's unexpected request had shattered the fragile peace of mind I had gained after the sale of the land, and I knew it was only the beginning. When I returned home after my shift, I sank tiredly into the old armchair I'd once bought with Clive at a second-hand furniture sale. I closed my eyes, and the image of my late husband, his smiling face, the dimples on his cheeks, his perpetually disheveled blonde hair. Clive died 22 years ago. A heart attack at 48. Too young, too sudden. Sometimes I thought his heart couldn't bear the weight of his unfulfilled hopes. He was always a dreamer, a man who believed that great fortune awaited around the next corner. I got up from my chair and walked over to the sideboard where I kept my photo albums. I took out the one with the yellowed cover and opened it carefully. On the first page was our wedding photo, very young, with shining eyes. Me in a simple white dress my mother had made, Clive in a suit borrowed from his older brother. We are standing in front of a small Methodist church in Taos, with the mountains in the background, eternal witnesses to our short life together. After flipping through a few pages, I stop at a photograph taken the day we first visited my parents' piece of land after we were married. Clive stood with his legs spread wide, arms at his sides, looking out into the distance as if he could see more than just 5 acres of dusty land with a few stunted trees. I smiled at the memory. Clive was always one step ahead of his time. Organic food, alternative energy, ecotourism. He'd been talking about all of these things long before they were commonplace terms. Closing the album, I walked to the window. My little house was on the outskirts of Taos, in the old part of town. I couldn't see that piece of land from here, but I knew its location by heart. It was to the northeast, behind a hill with a lone juniper on top. My father, Harold Becker, had purchased the land in the 50s when he returned from the Korean War. He paid a pittance for it. In those days, no one saw value in the rocky soil so far from town. But Dad was a stubborn man. Land is the one thing that isn't going anywhere, he used to tell me. You may lose your job, your home, even your family, but the land will always be where you left it. My mother, Louise, was a quiet woman with strained hands and eyes that seemed too old for her face. She worked as a seamstress in a local atelier, and in the evenings she sewed to order. Her hands were always in motion. When not working, they were poring over the rosary beads inherited from her Catholic grandmother. Land was her father's dream, not hers, but she supported him, as she did in everything else. Harold knows what he's doing, she'd say when neighbors shook their heads at her husband's fruitless attempts to grow something on the rocky soil. I'd inherited that ability from my mother, to believe in a man more than he believed in himself. It came in handy with Clive. When they died, the land passed to me, the only daughter. Clive became even more passionate about the farm. He gave up his job at the machine shop and devoted himself to learning about organic farming. He bought books, attended seminars, even joined some kind of community of enthusiastic farmers. In those days, such people were considered cranks. But Clive's dreams were not destined to come true. The economic crisis of the 80s hit us hard. We were barely making ends meet. There was no money to build a house, let alone everything else we needed for the farm. And then there were the children with their own needs. Trenton, our oldest, a serious boy who always wanted the fanciest clothes and the latest toys. And Vanity, willful from birth, always demanding special attention. The dream of the farm slipped further and further away, becoming something ephemeral that Clive spoke of less and less often. When he was diagnosed with coronary heart disease, he took it with surprising calm. "It's okay, Judy," he said, squeezing my hand in the hospital room. "We'll still make it. We have plenty of time ahead of us." But there was no time. The heart attack came suddenly, on an ordinary Tuesday while he was working in the garden behind the house. I found him there among the newly planted tomatoes. He looked almost peaceful, as if he had just laid down to rest in the shade of an apple tree. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to even think about that land. It became a symbol of unfulfilled hopes, a monument to dreams that would never come true. I focused on raising the kids, paying the bills, just surviving. I worked as a cashier at the supermarket, part-time at Laura's Diner on weekends. Vanity was 13 when her father died. Trenton was 16, a hard age to lose a father. I sighed, coming back to the present. How would my parents feel about me selling the land? My father would probably be disappointed. To him, land wasn't just property, but something sacred, a legacy to be passed down from generation to generation. Mother, she would have understood. She had always been a practical woman and knew the value of financial security. And Clive? He'd support my decision, I was sure of it. He dreamed of the farm, not for the land itself, but for the future it represented. A happy, secure future for our family. If he knew that this land would give me a chance at a peaceful old age after decades of hard work, he would be overjoyed. But what would they say about Vanity's request? I imagined my father frowning, shaking his head. "Never lend what you can't afford to lose," he often said. Mother might have hesitated as I did. For her, family always came first, even if it meant sacrifice. As I pondered this, I realized I should talk to Trenton. Maybe he knew something about Vanity's situation, about why she needed money so urgently. Though brother and sister had never been particularly close, Taos is a small town and gossip spreads fast. I picked up my cell phone and dialed my son's number. Trenton lived in Espanola, about an hour's drive from Taos. He worked as a manager at a construction store and was married, but he and Megan didn't have kids yet. We saw each other infrequently, usually at Thanksgiving or Christmas, unless he found an excuse to decline the invitation. "Hello?" His voice sounded wary, as it always did when he saw my number on the phone screen. "Hi, Trenton, it's Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "How are you? How's Megan?" "I'm fine," he answered briefly. "What's wrong?" Typical Trenton, straight to the point without the pleasantries. I suppressed a sigh. "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to see how you were doing. Maybe I could stop by this weekend." There was a pause, and I could practically see him mentally going over his excuses. "I can't this weekend, Mom. We have, plans." "Of course," I said, trying not to show disappointment. "Maybe some other time. By the way, have you talked to Vanity lately?" "Vanity?" There was surprise in his voice. "No, we haven't talked in, I don't know, 3 months? Maybe 4? Why?" I hesitated. Should I tell him about my sister's request? On the one hand, it might seem like I was complaining or trying to turn him against her. On the other hand, I really needed advice and I didn't have anyone else close to me. "She came by today," I finally said. "Asked for money. A lot of money. And you're surprised?" Trenton sounded bitter. Classic Vanity. Always only shows up when she needs something. "She said she wants to start a business," I continued. "An online store or something." Trenton snorted. "And you believe that? Mom, you know Vanity. She's never worked more than 3 months in one place in her life. What business?" He was right, and we both knew it. Vanity had a few odd jobs. Waitress, saleswoman, even tried her hand at real estate at one time, but it didn't work out. She'd get fired or quit the job herself, finding some excuse, bad conditions, a picky boss, an unsuitable schedule. "I know," I sighed. "But she seemed genuinely scared. Said it was a matter of life and death." "Dramatizing it like she always does," Trenton said. "Look, Mom, don't give her any money. especially now that you sold Grandpa's lot. She'll burn through it in no time, and then what? You'll have nothing left. So he knew about the land sale, too. No wonder. Taos is too small for secrets. I'm not going to give her all the money, I argued. But maybe some of it, if she's really in trouble. Mom, Trenton's voice became hard. Vanity's always in trouble, all her life. And she always finds someone to solve her problems. Usually it's been you. But this is your life savings we're talking about here, your safety. You deserve some peace of mind in your old age. I shuddered at that expression. In my old age. I was only 67, and I didn't feel old, despite the arthritis in my knees and the aching back after a long day at work. You don't know what exactly she might be about? I insisted. Had you heard anything? Maybe Dakota or Corey's in trouble? I have no idea, Trenton sounded impatient. Look, Mom, I gotta go. Megan's waiting. We were going to have dinner with friends. Sure, I said. I won't keep you. Tell her I said hi. I will, he replied, and I knew he wouldn't. And Mom, really be careful with Vanity. Don't let her manipulate you. I will, I promised, even though we both knew that was easier said than done. After talking to Trenton, I felt even more confused. On the one hand, his words confirmed what I already knew. Vanity wasn't to be trusted, especially when it came to money. On the other hand, my maternal instinct told me that something was really wrong this time. The fear in her eyes seemed real. I went to the window and looked out at the setting sun. It colored the mountains red-orange, creating that special light that only happened in New Mexico and that Clive loved to paint in his spare time. His watercolors still hung on the walls of our home, a little naive but full of love for this rugged, beautiful land. What would he have done in my shoes? Clive always believed the best in people, even when they gave him reason to think otherwise. Every man has his reasons, he used to say. You just have to try to understand them. I sighed, feeling heavy on my heart. The decision I was about to make seemed impossible. No matter what I chose, I'd have to let someone down Vanity if I refused her help, or myself if I gave up my hard-earned money. I turned away from the window, from the fading sun, from the memories it evoked. It was late, and I needed to rest before my shift tomorrow. But I knew sleep wouldn't come easily. Too many thoughts swirled in my head. Too many unspoken words and unaccepted decisions weighing heavily on my heart. I tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. Thoughts of Vanity, her strange request, and the mysterious phrase about grandchildren kept me awake. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I needed to see Dakota and Corey for myself. Maybe they knew something about their mother's situation. Maybe they needed help more than I thought. I hadn't seen my grandchildren in almost 4 months. Vanity always found reasons to cancel at the last minute, whether it was Corey's sudden cold or Dakota's important school event. Eventually, I stopped insisting to avoid disappointment. Maybe that was a mistake. After my morning shift at the diner, I went straight to their place without any advance warning. Vanity rented a small house on the southern edge of Taos, in a neighborhood that used to be considered decent, but had begun to decline in recent years. The drive took about 20 minutes. I tapped my fingers nervously on the steering wheel, not knowing what to expect. The house was worse than I remembered, with peeling paint on the facade, a broken window boarded up with cardboard, a cluttered yard with scattered children's toys, and a rusty bicycle without a wheel. Vanity's car, a used Ford she'd bought a couple years ago, was nowhere to be seen. I knocked on the door, and getting no answer, knocked again, louder. Finally, footsteps were heard and the door opened. Corey, my 12-year-old grandson, stood in front of me, wearing a crumpled t-shirt and shorts, his hair disheveled. He blinked, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Grandma? His voice sounded uncertain, as if he doubted it was really me. Hi, Corey, I smiled, trying to hide my shock at the sight of him. The boy looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. Can I come in? He nodded and stepped aside, letting me into the house. It was dark inside. The curtains were drawn tightly to keep out the daylight, and it smelled musty, a mixture of laundry, stale food, and cigarette smoke. Mom's not home? Corey said, as if apologizing. She's out, he stammered, to run some errands. It's okay, I tried to keep my voice casual. I'm here to see you. Is Dakota home? He nodded and shouted down the hallway. Duck! Grandma's here! I looked around while I waited. The living room was in terrible shape. The couch was stained with the padding sticking out in several places. The coffee table was littered with dirty plates, empty soda cans, and an ashtray full of cigarette butts. The floor hadn't been vacuumed in a while. A television hung on the wall, the only thing that looked new and expensive. Dakota emerged from the hallway. A tall, thin 17-year-old girl with dark hair pulled back in a sloppy bun. She was wearing sweatpants and a stretchy t-shirt. She looked wary, but her face brightened at the sight of me. Grandma! She came over quickly and hugged me tightly. Why didn't you say you were coming? I would have cleaned up. There was genuine embarrassment in her voice, and my heart squeezed. She was just a teenager, but she sounded like an adult in charge of the house. I thought I'd surprise her, I said, hugging her back and noticing how much she'd lost weight. How are you guys doing? Dakota and Corey exchanged quick glances, the kind of silent conversation that happens between siblings who have grown up in difficult circumstances. I'm fine, Dakota answered, but her tone didn't match her words. Do you want some coffee? I don't think we have any left. Don't worry, I've had some recently, I replied, not wanting them to waste the last of their supply on me. Let's just sit and talk. I missed you guys so much. We made ourselves comfortable in the living room. Dakota quickly picked up some of the trash from the table and brushed crumbs off the couch before I sat down. Corey squatted down next to me, unexpectedly snuggling up like he'd done in his early childhood. It was so unlike the 12-year-old boy he was now. My anxiety only increased. How was school? I asked, stroking his head. It's okay, Corey shrugged. I'm on the basketball team. You are? That's great. I was genuinely excited. Clive loved basketball and often played with Trenton in the yard. How's that going? I mostly sit on the bench, he admitted. But coach says I have potential. Of course you do, Dakota confirmed with big sister pride. He's the tallest in the class. We talked some more about school, about Corey's friends, about Dakota's preparations for graduation. Everything seemed almost normal, but I noticed warning signs, how they avoided certain topics, how Dakota took on an adult role, answering questions that should have been asked of their mother. Where's Mom? I finally asked bluntly. There was that exchange of looks again. She had things to do, Dakota answered vaguely. She promised she'd be back by tonight. What kind of business? I insisted gently. I'm not sure, Dakota shrugged, but I could tell she was lying. Work, I guess. Dakota. I looked her straight in the eye. You can tell me the truth. I'm here to help. She bit her lip, and for a moment I saw in her the little girl who used to come to me with broken knees and torn dresses. Mommy said she came to see you, she finally admitted, to talk about the money. She was supposed to be back yesterday, but she didn't show up. She called this morning, said she'd be late. So Vanity didn't come home after we talked. Where'd she go? Who was she with? Why didn't she take care of her kids? How long has she been? She's been so late, I asked cautiously. Dakota shrugged. It happens. Usually a day or two, sometimes longer. We're used to it. I can take care of myself, Corey put in with a child's inappropriate pride. I'm a big boy. Of course you are, I agreed, holding back the anger that was building up inside. But this isn't something you have to handle on your own. I got up and headed for the kitchen, unable to sit still any longer. The mess was even worse here. Dirty dishes in the sink, empty pizza boxes, crumbs and stains everywhere. I opened the refrigerator and felt my insides clench. Almost empty, just an expired milk carton, some cheese, half a bottle of ketchup, and a couple of apples. Have you been eating normally for a long time? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Yesterday was pizza, Corey answered, appearing next to me, and cereal with milk for breakfast. Dakota stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed over her chest, looking at me with an expression that was a mix of defiance and shame. I was going to go to the store today, she said. I have some money from my part-time job at the cafe. You work? I asked, surprised. On weekends and sometimes after school, Dakota nodded. At Sunny Corner, that coffee shop by the park. It doesn't pay much, but it's something. I felt a heaviness building in my chest. A 17-year-old shouldn't have to work to feed himself and his little brother while their mother disappears for days at a time. What about the rent? I asked, remembering suddenly that Vanity had asked for money for some kind of security deposit. Dakota averted her gaze. With that, complicated. The landlord came by yesterday, very angry. Said if Mom didn't pay by the end of the week, we'd have to move out. How much does she owe? I don't know exactly. 3 months, I think. 3 months. At the rent, I remembered about $800. It was over 2,000. A lot of money, but nowhere near the 100,000 that Vanity was asking for. Grandma? Corey tugged at my sleeve. Are you staying for dinner? His childlike hopefulness, contrasted with the dismal surroundings, broke my heart. You know what? I said, making a decision. Let's do this. I'll take you to the store, we'll buy groceries, and then I'll make a real dinner. Like we used to, remember? When you used to come and visit me. Corey's face brightened, and Dakota looked both grateful and embarrassed. There's no need, Grandma, she began. We'll manage. I know you can handle it, I interrupted gently. But sometimes even the strongest people need help. At the store, I watched Dakota methodically pick out groceries, checking prices and comparing them, a skill that kids her age don't usually have. Corey stayed close by, occasionally timidly asking if there was anything special he could add to the cart. Cookies, juice, cereal with chocolate. Dakota cast a quick glance at me each time, and I nodded. No restrictions today. Returning home with full bags of groceries, we sorted through our purchases together. I insisted on washing the dishes before I started cooking, and Dakota joined me, silently wiping the plates and setting them out. Corey went to his room to get the drawings he wanted to show me. How long has this been going on? I asked quietly when we were alone. Your mom? Her absence? Dakota sighed as if shedding a weight she'd been carrying for too long. Always, I guess. But it had gotten worse in the last couple years, especially since she'd broken up with Rick. Rick was Vanity's last boyfriend, a truck driver who appeared and disappeared depending on flights. I'd only met him a couple times, and he seemed gruff but caring toward the kids. Does she drink? I asked the question I'd been afraid to ask for a long time. Dakota hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Not only that, she added so quietly that I could barely hear her. She has a gambling problem. She could stay up all night sitting at her laptop. It explained a lot of things. The constant lack of money, the outstanding debts, her nervousness the last time we met. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked, feeling guilty and betrayed at the same time. She's my mother, Dakota answered simply. And she forbade it. Said that if you found out, you'd take us away, and we're family. We have to stick together. Classic vanity manipulation, using family ties to get others to keep her secrets, cover her mistakes. What else did she say about me? I asked, afraid to hear the answer. Dakota looked away, clearly unwilling to continue this conversation. Dakota, please, I insisted. I need to know. She said, she stammered, that you had a lot of money, that you sold some land and made a fortune, but you didn't want to share it with us, that you always loved Uncle Trenton more than her, and you were saving up everything for him. I felt the color rush to my face. So that's how Vanity pictured me to her children, a stingy, unfair grandmother who favored one child over another. Do you believe that? I asked quietly. Dakota shrugged. I don't know what to believe. Mom talks a lot, especially when she drinks. The last few months she's been mentioning your money all the time, how much we could do if you shared it, how different our lives would be. What did she say about the land? I asked, trying to see if the grandchildren knew anything about their heritage. Just that you sold some land, Dakota answered. Why? Is it important? I looked at her. A smart, strong girl who had grown up too young to take care of her brother, and realized that Vanity had never told her children about their great-grandfather, about the land, about the dreams that went with that little piece of New Mexico. This land belonged to your great-grandfather Harold, I said as I continued to make dinner. He bought it after the Korean War when he came home. 5 acres of unfertile land that no one wanted, but he believed in her. I told her about Harold and Louise, about their hard work, about the dreams they had for the land. about Clive and his plans to build a farm there, about how the land was always a symbol of hope for our family, even when everything else was falling apart. I sold it 6 months ago, I finished, to a company that's building a cottage community. To be honest, it took me a long time to make up my mind. It felt like I was betraying my father's memory, Clive's dreams. But I had no choice. I needed money for my old age. I couldn't work forever. Dakota listened without interrupting, with an expression of genuine interest. I suddenly realized that this might be the first time anyone had ever told her about her roots, about a family history that didn't revolve around vanity's dramas and crises. "So this money is all you have?" she finally asked. I nodded. "I put it in an account. Thought I could live off the interest, maybe cut back on my hours, get more rest. My knees aren't what they used to be." I tried to smile. "And your mom's asking you for that money." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. 100,000, I confirmed. She said she wanted to start a business. Dakota snorted, just like Trenton had during our phone conversation. "A business? Mom never finishes anything. She has a new idea every week, but as soon as things get tough, she drops the whole thing." The age-appropriate wisdom in her words made me take a closer look at my granddaughter. She grew up in difficult circumstances, with a mother who seemed more like another child than a parent, and yet she retained her clarity of mind and strong character. "What do you think she's going to do with the money?" I asked bluntly. Dakota paused, as if weighing whether to tell the truth. "I don't know for sure," she said finally. "But some men came to our house last week. I heard them threatening Mom. Something about a debt to be repaid. She promised she'd have money soon. Big money. So that's what this is about. Not business, not caring about the kid's future. Debts? Probably serious debts, considering the amount she was asking for." "What did she mean when she said the grandkids would pay you back?" I remembered the cryptic phrase Vanity had thrown out when she'd left. Dakota frowned. "I have no idea. Maybe just another manipulation. You know, Mom, she says anything that will help her get what she wants." That's when Corey came flying into the kitchen waving his sketchbook. "Grandma, look! I drew our basketball class. That's Coach Mark, and that's me, and that's Jason. He's the best player." My conversation with Dakota was cut short, but I'd learned enough. Vanity was using my money as a solution to her debt problems, possibly even dangerous problems judging by the mention of threatening men. And all the while, her children lived in near poverty, left to fend for themselves. We made dinner together. A simple but hearty meal. Roast vegetables, rice, salad. Corey helped chop tomatoes for the salad, proudly displaying his culinary skills. Dakota handled the stove expertly, clearly used to cooking for herself and her brother. Over dinner, we talked about lighter things, about school, about friends, about movies they liked. I told stories about Clive, about how funny and kind he was, how he liked to draw, how he taught Trenton and Vanity how to ride a bike. Corey listened with his mouth open. He'd only been 2 years old when his father died, and he barely remembered him, and neither did his grandfather. "Will you stay the night?" he asked hopefully when I went in to say goodnight to him. I hadn't planned on it, but looking into his eyes, I couldn't say no. "Of course I'll stay," I promised, adjusting the blanket. "I'll be here when you wake up." He smiled and closed his eyes. I stood for a moment longer, watching his breathing become even and deep. He seemed so small and vulnerable in his narrow bed, with a teddy bear I knew he'd never admit he still cuddled at night. When I returned to the living room, Dakota was sitting on the couch, wrapping her arms around her knees and staring into the space in front of her. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, sitting down next to her. "About what will happen next," she said quietly. "If we get evicted, where will we go? Mom doesn't even have the money to put down a deposit on a new apartment, let alone make the payments." I felt my heart clench. A 17-year-old girl shouldn't have to worry about such things. "We'll figure something out," I said, though I didn't know what. "You're not alone, Dakota. I'm here." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between hope and skepticism. "Mom said you wouldn't help," she said finally. "That you always judged her, that you thought she was a bad mother." I never, I started but stopped. Perhaps there was some truth in what Vanity said. I did often criticize her parenting methods, her irresponsibility. Maybe instead of constantly pointing out her mistakes, I should have been more helpful, more supportive. I love your mom, I said instead. She's my daughter, and I love you and Corey. You're my family. Dakota nodded, as if accepting my words but not quite believing them. I didn't know what to say. The money from the land sale could provide Dakota's education, a safe place for Corey to live, but it was also my only provision for my old age. And if I gave it to Vanity as she asked, it would simply disappear into the black hole of her debts and dependencies. We sat in silence, each immersed in our own thoughts. The house was quiet, with only the clock on the wall ticking softly and the water dripping from a faulty faucet. I thought about Clive, about what he would have done in my place, about my parents and their hard work, about the land that had finally borne fruit, but not in the way they expected. Finally, Dakota yawned, unable to fight the fatigue any longer. You should get some sleep, I said, getting up. School tomorrow. She nodded and got up as well. Thank you for coming, Grandma, she said sincerely. And for dinner and for everything. Always, I replied, hugging her. Always. When Dakota retired to her room, I remained sitting in the living room, looking at the pictures on the wall, rare evidence of happy moments in this family's life. Vanity with baby Corey in her arms, a smiling Dakota with a certificate for some school competition, all three of them on the beach during a rare trip to the ocean. I thought about Dakota's words, about how Vanity had envisioned me to her children, a stingy grandmother who didn't want to share the wealth, about how she'd use that money as a solution to all her problems, not thinking about the fact that it was the result of selling the family legacy, the last thing I had left. But what bothered me the most was the thought of the men who came here with threats. What had Vanity gotten herself into? And how serious was the danger to her and, more importantly, to the children? I had to know more before I made a decision. And there was only one person who could tell me the whole truth about Vanity's situation: her ex-husband Dakota and Corey's father. A man who knew her better than anyone else, including me. The morning was gloomy, matching my mood. I made the kids breakfast, made sure Corey had packed a backpack for school, and gave Dakota some money just in case. They both looked surprised when I told them I'd be back tonight to make dinner. What about work? Dakota asked. I'll take the day off, I replied. Laura would understand. Actually, I had other plans for today. I had to meet Robert Parker, Vanity's ex-husband and Dakota and Corey's father. We hadn't spoken in years since their divorce, and I didn't know if he would agree to talk to me. But he was the only one who could tell me the truth about Vanity's situation. Robert now lived in Ranchos de Taos, 15 minutes outside of town. I'd found his address in old papers. Vanity had once left it for me in case something happened to the kids, and she was unavailable. Ironic. Robert's house turned out to be small and modest but neat, with a well-kept garden and a freshly painted fence. I was nervous as I approached the door. We'd never been particularly close. Robert seemed too withdrawn, and I probably looked too controlling in his eyes. But on the whole, we'd gotten along, until the divorce. I knocked, and almost immediately I heard footsteps. The door opened and I saw Robert, a little older, with graying hair and new wrinkles around his eyes, but still with the same calm, thoughtful expression. Judy? He looked surprised, but not unfriendly. Did something happen to the children? No, they're fine, I hastened to assure him. As much as possible under the circumstances. I need to talk to you, Robert, about Vanity. He hesitated for a second, then nodded and stepped back, letting me into the house. Come on in. Do you want coffee? The inside was as neat as the outside: minimalist furniture, bookshelves, a few pictures of kids on the walls. No luxury, but clean and cozy. Thanks, I said, following him into the small kitchen. How are you? Fine, he shrugged, working on the coffee maker. I work at a machine shop, recently promoted to manager. Life is going on. We exchanged a few more polite phrases while he made coffee. I noticed that Robert seemed calmer, more confident than when he'd been married to Vanity. Back then, he had always seemed a little nervous, constantly wary. Finally, we sat down at the kitchen table with cups of coffee, and I decided to cut to the chase. Robert, I need to know what's going on with Vanity. She came to me, asking for money, $100,000. Said she wanted to start a business, but I suspect that's not true. He raised his eyebrows but didn't look surprised. $100,000? That's quite an appetite, he said dryly. Let me guess, she mentioned children? Said it was for their future? I nodded, feeling my insides clench. So this was her usual method. I was at their house yesterday, I continued. The kids are practically on their own. The fridge is empty, the bills aren't paid, Dakota works after school to buy food. I know. Robert interrupted me, and there was a tiredness in his voice. I tried to intervene, but Vanity won't let me near the kids. I have visitation rights, but every time I try to exercise them, she makes excuses. And the courts. They always side with the mother, especially when the father has a history of trouble. I remembered that Robert did have a difficult period after returning from Iraq. Post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, alcohol problems. But he coped, went to therapy, quit drinking. Vanity, on the other hand, has only exacerbated her problems over the years. What's going on with her, Robert? I asked her bluntly. Dakota mentioned gambling, alcohol, and some people who'd come around threatening her. Robert sighed and rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture of deep fatigue. It's a long story, Judy. But to make a long story short, yes, Vanity has a serious gambling problem. They started when we were still together. First the casino in Santa Fe, then online poker, sports betting. I tried to help her stop, offered therapy, support groups, but she denied it, said she could quit at any time, that she was in control. He paused, sipping his coffee. It got worse after our divorce. Without me, there was no one to hold her back. She started borrowing money from everyone she knew, friends, co-workers, casual acquaintances. When the usual sources dried up, she turned to loan sharks. Loan sharks? I asked, feeling my back grow cold. You mean? Yes, exactly what you mean, Robert nodded. People who lend money at high interest rates and then use less than legal methods to collect their debts. At first, it was just local guys, but then she got in touch with someone from Albuquerque. They're much more serious. I felt my insides clench with fear. My daughter, a mother of two, owed criminal elements. How much does she owe them? I asked quietly. As far as I know, about 70,000, Robert answered. Maybe more with interest. They gave her a month to pay, and that expires next week. 70,000. That's a lot of money, but still not the 100,000 Vanity had asked for. And the rest? I asked. Where would another 30,000 go? Robert shrugged. Knowing Vanity? Probably back into the game. She always believes that the next bet will be a winning bet, that she can win back and solve all her problems in one fell swoop. That sounded plausible. Vanity had always had a penchant for quick fixes, for taking the easy way out. Like Clive, she believed in luck more than hard work. But unlike her husband, who was just a dreamer, Vanity stopped at nothing in pursuit of her dreams. She had already mortgaged everything she could, Robert continued. The car, the TV, the laptop, even those gold earrings she got from your mother. I shuddered. My mother's earrings were the only valuable thing she had, a family heirloom that had been passed down from generation to generation. I'd given them to Vanity on her 21st birthday, hoping that one day she'd pass them on to Dakota. Where did she pawn the earrings? I asked, feeling a lump come up in my throat. At a pawn shop on Paseo del Pueblo, Robert answered. I tried to buy them back, but I didn't have time. The deadline had passed and they were sold. Just another piece of the family legacy lost forever. Like the land, only with much less use. How long have you known about all this? I asked, unable to keep the reproach out of my voice. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Robert looked at me with tired understanding. What difference would it have made, Judy? You'd have given her the money, she'd have lost it, and we'd be in the same situation, only you'd be a few thousand poorer. Vanity doesn't need financial help. She needs treatment. Professional treatment for gambling and alcohol addiction. He was right, and I knew it. But that didn't make it any easier. I'm scared for the kids, I admitted. If these people are really dangerous. They are dangerous, Robert confirmed grimly. But they don't usually hurt children. They're interested in money, not revenge. If Vanity pays, they'll leave her alone until the next time. And if she doesn't? He paused, searching for words. They might be convincing, physically, but I repeat, they are businessmen of a sort. Dead or crippled debtors are not profitable. That didn't reassure me much. I pictured Vanity, beaten up by some thugs, and shuddered. Despite all her faults, she was still my daughter. Why didn't you try to get custody of the children? I asked. If the situation is that serious? I tried, Robert answered. Twice. Both times the court left the kids with her. I didn't have the cleanest history after I got back from Iraq, remember? Plus, Vanity knows how to play the perfect mom when she needs to. And now Dakota will be an adult soon, so custody is practically off the table. I remembered how Vanity always had a way of charming people, especially men. No wonder the court believed her over Robert with his military background and history of alcoholism, even if long since overcome. What do you advise me to do? I asked after a pause. Give her the money? Refuse? Robert hesitated, looking out the window at the gray New Mexico sky. I can't tell you what to do, Judy. It's your money, your daughter. I can only tell you what I've seen before. Every time someone gave Vanity money, me, her friends, even the banks with their credit cards, the situation only got worse. First relief, then new debts, more than before. He turned to me, and in his eyes I saw genuine pain. I loved her, despite everything. Part of me still does. She's the mother of my children, and somewhere deep down inside there's good in her. But her disease, and gambling addiction is a disease, is stronger than she is. And she won't admit that she needs help. I knew what he was talking about. Vanity had always been a complex person. Bright, energetic, full of life, but also selfish, impulsive, unable to think about consequences. As a mother, I loved her unconditionally, but as a human being, I often disapproved of her choices, her attitude toward life. What about the children? I asked. What would happen to them if Vanity couldn't solve her problems? Dakota will be an adult soon, Robert answered. She's a strong girl, always has been. But Corey, he stammered. I'd like him to live with me, but I'm not sure the court will allow it. And then, Dakota and Corey are very attached to each other. Separating them would be cruel. We were silent for a moment, thinking about our own things. Outside the window, the rain began to drizzle, light and cold, typical of spring in New Mexico. There's something else you should know, Robert said at last. And something in his tone made me wary. Vanity had already tried to use children as an argument to get money from other people. What do you mean? I asked, though part of me was already guessing. She went to my parents last year, Robert explained. She said Dakota had gotten a scholarship to a prestigious college, but there was a down payment to be made, $10,000. They gave her the money, of course. Except there was no scholarship. Dakota hadn't even applied to that college. I closed my eyes, feeling the color of shame flood my face. My own daughter was using her children to scam people out of money. And then there was my brother, Robert continued. Vanity told him that Corey needed special treatment, some new therapy for kids with learning problems, 15,000 more, and another lie. Oh my God, I whispered. How could she? When you're addicted, you can justify anything, Robert said, and I could hear the echo of personal experience in his voice. Lying, manipulation, betrayal, anything becomes acceptable if it gets you closer to the next dose, the next bet, the next sip. I remembered Vanity's strange phrase when we met. Your grandchildren will pay you back. Its meaning was clearer now. She was using the children as moral collateral, as a way to pressure me. She knew I couldn't say no when it came to Dakota and Corey's future. What happened to the money your parents and brother gave you? I asked, even though the answer was obvious. The same thing that would happen to yours if you gave it to her, Robert answered. Some of it went to pay off the most urgent debts, and the rest went to new bets in hopes of getting even. And of course, nothing for the children. We sat in silence. The rain intensified, drumming on the roof as if hurrying me to make a decision. The picture was becoming clearer and the choice harder. I sold my father's land, I said at last. The 5 acres he'd bought after the Korean War. The land Clive had dreamed of building a farm on. It was the only thing I had left, my last resource, my security for my old age. Robert nodded with understanding. And now Vanity wants you to give her that money. Yes, I sighed. $100,000. Almost everything I got from the sale. And you realize you'll never see them again. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Yes, I repeated quietly. I do. We were silent again. I thought about the children, about Vanity's debts, about the threats that could become reality. That the money that was meant for my peaceful old age would just dissolve into the bottomless pit of her addictions. There is another way, Robert said suddenly. A way to really help Vanity and the kids, not just pay them off. What is it? I looked up at him, clinging to any hope. A rehab center, he answered. Professional treatment for addiction. There's a good place in Santa Fe that specializes in gambling addiction combined with alcohol addiction. They take insurance, but there's a hefty copay, about $30,000 for the full course. And you think she'll go for it? I asked skeptically. Probably not, Robert admitted. At least not willingly. But you have leveraged the money she needs so badly. You could make a condition, treatment in exchange for debt relief. It sounded reasonable, but I doubted Vanity would accept such terms. She'd always been stubborn, proud, unable to admit her weaknesses. And the children? I asked. What would happen to them while she was in treatment? They could live with you, Robert suggested. Or with me, though I'm not sure the court would approve that without Vanity's consent. Or maybe together, some of the time with you, some of the time with me. I pictured Dakota and Corey living in my little house. It was cramped, but we could manage. Most importantly, they'd be safe, fed, and cared for. And one more thing, Robert added, looking me in the eye. Whatever you decide, don't give her the whole amount at once. If you're willing to help with the debt, insist on paying the creditors directly. Otherwise, the money will never reach them. That advice made sense. I nodded, feeling a plan begin to form in my head, not a perfect one, but perhaps the only one possible under the circumstances. Thank you, Robert, I said sincerely, for the truth, for the advice, for still caring about them no matter what. He smiled weakly. They're my family, Judy. No matter what happens between me and Vanity, Dakota and Corey will always be my children. As I walked away, the rain had stopped, and rays of sunlight were breaking through the clouds, creating whimsical patterns on the wet asphalt. Symbolic, I thought. After a storm, there's always a clearing, even if it's only for a little while. I got into the car, but I was in no hurry to start the engine. There was too much information to digest, too many decisions to make. $100,000. Almost all of my savings, all of my security. Money that would allow me to finally rest after decades of hard work, to stop worrying about bills, maybe even do a little traveling like I'd always dreamed of. But if I didn't give it to Vanity, what would happen to her? To the kids? Will I be able to live with the thought of my daughter suffering at the hands of creditors when I could have prevented it? And if I did, what then? Robert was right. The money would simply disappear into the bottomless pit of her addictions. They might solve the immediate problem, but they wouldn't prevent new debts, new crises, new demands for help. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about what Robert had told me. About how Vanity used her children to manipulate people and get money. About her debts, her addictions, her lies. About how the money from the sale of the family legacy, the money meant for my peaceful old age, would just dissolve into her problems without truly solving anything. The bitter truth was that I couldn't save Vanity from herself, no matter how much I wanted to. And perhaps the hardest decision of my life would be to recognize that fact and find the strength to do the right thing. Not the way Vanity wanted, but the way that would truly be best for all of us in the long run. Vanity called the next day, early in the morning. I was just getting ready for work when the phone rang. Have you thought about it? She asked without greeting, her voice sounding strained. Yes, I answered. We need to talk, not on the phone. There was a pause, then she said, I can come over to your place tonight, 6 o'clock. Okay, I agreed. I'll be waiting. I was on pins and needles all day. Laura even asked if everything was okay, noticing that I'd broken 2 cups in one shift, something unheard of for me with my experience. Family problems, I answered evasively, and she nodded understandingly, not questioning. By 6 o'clock, I was home in time to make dinner not for Vanity, but for the kids, whom I planned to pick up later. I talked to Dakota on the phone throughout the day, making sure they were okay. Vanity never showed up at the house. At 6 sharp, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage, and opened it. Vanity looked worse than she had the last time I'd seen her, slim, with dark circles under her eyes, fidgeting with the strap of her bag. Her usually immaculate hair was sloppy, and I noticed a stain on her jeans that she seemed to be trying unsuccessfully to scrub off. "Hi," she said, walking into the house. "Do you have anything to drink?" "Tea, coffee, water," I replied, deliberately ignoring her real question. She wrinkled her nose but didn't insist. "Okay, coffee then." We walked to the kitchen. I put the kettle on, took out the coffee, the cups, ordinary actions that now seemed oddly ritualized, like the last moments of peace before the storm. "So, what was it?" Vanity couldn't stand it when I put the cup in front of her. "Will you give me the money?" The bluntness of the question didn't surprise me. Vanity had never been known for tact or patience. "Not exactly," I answered, sitting down across from her. "I have another suggestion." She tensed, her fingers tightening around the cup. "What other offer?" "I need money, Mom. 100,000. You know that." "I know you need the money," I agreed. "But I also know what it's really for. Not for business, not for the kids. To pay your debts to the loan sharks in Albuquerque." Vanity turned pale. Then her face contorted with anger. "You talked to Robert." It wasn't a question, but a statement spoken with venomous bitterness. "How predictable! Always looking for a way to smear me, aren't you?" "I talked to Robert," I confirmed calmly, "and Dakota. And I've seen how your kids live in a house where there's no food, where the bills haven't been paid in months, where a 17-year-old girl has to work to feed herself and her brother." Vanity looked away. Something akin to shame flashed across her face, but was quickly replaced by a familiar mask of resentment. "Don't lecture me," she snapped. "You don't know what I'm going through. If you'd just give me the money, things would be better. We could start over." "No, Vanity." I shook my head. "Money won't solve your problems. It would solve one particular problem, your creditors. But in a month, 2 months, 6 months, you'll be back in debt. Because it's not about money, it's about addiction." "I'm not an addict," she exclaimed, slamming her palm on the table so that the coffee spilled out of the cup. "I'm just in a difficult situation. Everyone needs help sometimes." I looked at my daughter, a beautiful, intelligent woman who could have accomplished so much in life, but instead chose self-destruction time after time. "Vanity," I said softly, "you get into a difficult situation every few months. It's not an accident, it's a pattern, and money isn't going to change it." She stood up and started pacing the kitchen, running her hands nervously through her hair. "What do you know? You spent your whole life working in a diner, saving every dime, never taking risks, never trying for anything more. And now that you finally have money, you cling to it like a cheapskate." Her words hurt, but I was ready for it. Vanity always knew how to hit the sore spots. "This money," I began quietly but firmly, "is not just money. It's my father's land. The land he bought when he came back from the war. The land he worked until he blistered. The land your father dreamed of building a home for us, a farm, a future for you and Trenton." I stood up, walked over to the sideboard, and pulled out an old photograph, my parents standing on that very plot of land, young, smiling, full of hope. "Your grandfather believed that this land would one day provide for the family. And he was right, just not in the way he envisioned. I sold it so I could have some security in my old age, so I wouldn't have to work until my last day like he did. And I won't let you take it away, Vanity. I won't let you squander the last of what's left of them." Vanity looked at the photograph without interest, as if they were strangers, unrelated to her. "It's very touching," she said sarcastically. "But Grandpa's gone, the land's gone, and there's only money, and I need it now, not you for some mythical old age." "You need help," I said, ignoring the jab. "Real help, not money, and I'm ready to give it to you." She squinted suspiciously. "What do you mean?" "I'll pay for your treatment," I said bluntly. "There's a good rehab center in Santa Fe that specializes in gambling addiction. 3 months of intensive therapy. And I'll help with your debts, not the whole amount, but enough to buy you time." Vanity froze, her face impenetrable. "Treatment?" she asked again. "Do you think I'm sick?" "Yes," I answered simply. "Gaming addiction is a disease, Vanity, like alcoholism, and there's no shame in it. Lots of people go through it and recover." "I'm not an alcoholic or a gambling addict," she shouted, her face contorted with anger. I just like to relax sometimes, to play. It's okay. It's okay if it doesn't ruin your life, I argued calmly. It's okay if it doesn't hurt your children. But you crossed that line a long time ago, Vanity. And deep down inside, you know it. She turned away, crossing her arms over her chest, a gesture of defense I remembered from her teenage years. And what's going to happen to the kids while I'm in this treatment of yours? She asked defiantly. They'll live with me, I replied. I'll take care of them, and Robert is willing to help too. He's still their father, Vanity, despite your divorce. Robert, she snorted. Of course you two are conspiring against me? You want to take away my children. No one wants to take away your children, I explained patiently. We want you to get well, to be the healthy mother they deserve, which you can be, I know you can be. Vanity shook her head, her eyes glistening with the tears she refused to shed. You don't understand, she said quietly. These people, they're not kidding. If I don't give them the money by the end of the week, I'll talk to them, I suggested. I'll pay part of it, negotiate installments, but the main condition is that you go to treatment. And if I refuse, she asked defiantly. I took a deep breath, preparing to say the words I knew would change our relationship forever. Then I won't give you a dime, I said firmly. And what's more, I'll sue for temporary custody of Dakota and Corey. I have proof of neglect, the empty refrigerator, the unpaid bills. You're not being home for days at a time. Robert will corroborate, Dakota if she has to, too. Vanity turned pale, then red with rage. You wouldn't dare! They are my children! It's because they're your children that I'm doing this, I replied. They deserve better, Vanity. And you, deep down, you know it. She looked at me with such anger that I could almost physically feel the heat of it. I always knew you didn't love me, she spat out. I always knew Trenton was your favorite, and now you want to take away the last thing I have. I love you, Vanity, I said with pain in my voice. I always have, from the first moment I saw your tiny face in the hospital. You're my daughter, my flesh and blood, and that's why I can't continue to indulge your self-destruction. Beautiful words, she grinned bitterly. Very convenient to cover up your stinginess and controlling behavior. I shook my head, feeling the fatigue growing inside, not physical fatigue, but emotional, deep-seated fatigue from the endless cycle of accusations and excuses. Think what you want, Vanity. My offer still stands. Treatment and help with my debts in exchange for temporary custody of the kids. Or I sue and don't give you a dime. You'll regret this, she hissed, grabbing her bag. I swear you'll regret it. Maybe, I agreed calmly. But right now I'm doing what I think is right. For you, for the kids, for all of us. She headed for the door but stopped at the threshold. You think you know everything, she said without turning around. You think you're so righteous, but you're just an old, lonely woman who can't let go of control. And when you die, no one will even cry at your funeral. With those words, she walked out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I sank into a chair, feeling my knees shake. This had gone even worse than I'd expected. Vanity's last words rang in my ears, cruel, unfair, but still heartbreaking. Part of me wanted to run after her, to tell her I'd change my mind, to give her the money, to do anything to win back her love. But the other part, the stronger, wiser part, knew that I had finally done the right thing, for the first time in years. I gave myself a few minutes to pull myself together, then picked up my phone and dialed Dakota's number. Grandma? Her voice sounded concerned. Is something wrong? Everything's fine, honey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was wondering if I could come and get you and Corey for a couple days. You can stay with me until the situation clears up. There was a pause, then Dakota said quietly, You talked to your mom. Yes, I confirmed. We haven't come to an agreement. I think she needs some time to cool off. And you and Corey should stay with me for a while. Was she really angry? Dakota asked, and I could hear in her voice the anxiety of a child who knows all too well the anger of a parent. She's upset, I said diplomatically. But it's not your fault, remember that. Not yours, not Corey's. These are adult issues, and we adults have to deal with them. Dakota sighed, and in that sigh I heard relief. Okay, she said. We'll be ready in half an hour. I'll be there, I promised and hung up. As I packed, towels, bedding for the kids, my thoughts were preoccupied with what lay ahead. I knew that Vanity wouldn't give up easily, that she might take desperate steps. I knew that I might have to deal with her creditors, with the courts, with social services. But I also knew that for the first time in a long time, I was doing what I should have done long ago, standing up to protect not only my interests, but those of my grandchildren. On the way to Vanity's house, I pondered how to use the money from the land sale. I decided to save most of it for Dakota and Corey's future education, the true payback that Vanity had talked about. Dakota will be able to go to the college she dreamed of without worrying about tuition costs. Corey will get the support he needed, including sports camps and perhaps tutoring in subjects he struggled with. Some of the money I'll allocate for immediate problems, paying rent, buying groceries, perhaps moving to more suitable housing, and of course for Vanity's treatment if she does agree to undergo it. The rest would stay in my account, no longer as a safety cushion for the carefree old age I dreamed of, but as an emergency fund for a family that needed it more than I could imagine. When I pulled up to Vanity's house, Dakota and Corey were already waiting on the porch with small backpacks. There was no sign of Vanity's car or any sign of her return. "Hey guys," I said, trying to keep my voice upbeat. "Ready for a little adventure?" Corey smiled and nodded, but Dakota looked at me with an understanding that was beyond her years. "Mom's not coming back, is she?" she asked quietly when Corey had already climbed into the back seat. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But whatever happens, we'll get through it. Together." She nodded, and I could see the relief in her eyes, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders that she'd been carrying for too long. On the way home, Corey chatted about school, about basketball, about a movie he wanted to see. Dakota was silent as she stared out the window at the scenery of Taos floating by. Mountains, dried-up riverbeds, lone trees struggling against the harsh climate. I looked at the road, but my thoughts were far away. I thought of the land, of its meaning, of how it had always been a symbol of hope for our family, about how my father believed it would one day secure the future of his descendants, and about how, in a way, his prediction came true, just not in the way he expected. The land became not a farm, not a home as Clive had dreamed, but a means of protecting the most precious thing we had left: our children, our future, the continuation of the family. The money from its sale wouldn't provide me with a carefree old age, but it would give Dakota and Corey a chance at a better life. A chance that Vanity didn't get, perhaps in part because of my mistakes as a mother. I didn't know what the future would bring. I didn't know if Vanity would come back, if she would accept treatment, if she would ever be able to forgive me for my decision today. I didn't know if I would have the strength to deal with all the difficulties that surely lay ahead. But one thing I knew for sure was that I would no longer indulge my daughter's destructive behavior. I would not turn a blind eye to the suffering of my grandchildren. I would not be afraid to do what I thought was right, even if it was difficult, even if it hurt. It was a different path, not the one Vanity suggested, not the one that would be the easiest for me. A path of responsibility, of difficult decisions, perhaps even of loneliness. But it was the only way I could choose to stay true to myself, to my values, to the memory of my parents and Clive. By the time we pulled up to my house, the sun was setting, coloring the mountains in golden and purple hues. Dakota and Corey got out of the car, looking at my little house with curiosity. They hadn't been here much in recent years. "Welcome," I said, opening the door. "Make yourselves comfortable. I have your rooms ready for you." Corey rushed off to explore the house, and Dakota lingered beside me on the porch. "Thank you, Grandma," she said quietly, "for everything." I hugged her, feeling tears welling up in my eyes, not from grief, but from the strange, bittersweet feeling that despite all the mistakes, all the losses, all the disappointments, something important had survived. Something worth all the sacrifice and struggle. "Always," I replied, remembering the words I'd said to her during our conversation at Vanity's house. "Always." We walked into the house, closing the door behind us. The unknown lay ahead, but now, in this moment, we were together, and it was the beginning of a new journey for all of us.